The relentless red sand of Amera clung to everything with a persistence that bordered on obsession. It coated the cracked leather of Gloria's worn-out shoes, crept into the frayed hems of the village women's threadbare dresses, and even lodged itself between the teeth of the children who played near the dried-up well, their laughter gritty with dust. The sand was more than just earth. It was a living thing, an uninvited guest that settled into every crevice of life, refusing to be brushed away. It hung in the air like a memory, fine and choking, turning the sky to ochre with every gust of wind. It painted the trees, the rooftops, even the animals, so that every living thing bore the mark of the land's dryness, of its hunger. The sand knew no mercy. It crept into ears and eyes, into dreams, into silence. At 22, Gloria moved through the world like a shadow, her footsteps silent on the cracked clay paths of the village, her presence unnoticed unless she erred. Her once bright eyes, which had sparkled with the mischief of childhood and the wild hope of impossible dreams, were now dulled by exhaustion and the unending weight of survival. Life had not aged her. It had weathered her, as if she were a stone carved not by time, but by the slow, constant erosion of disappointment. Her skin, once the rich, smooth brown of polished mahogany, bore the scars of burns and beatings, each one a story no one cared to hear. Her hands, though young, were calloused and cracked, the fingers bent from years of scrubbing floors, kneading dough, hauling water, and weaving endless mats from brittle reeds. Each morning unfolded with cruel predictability. Long before the first streaks of dawn painted the sky in soft violet and amber, while the village still lay wrapped in the heavy silence of sleep, she would rise from her thin mat in the kitchen corner, her bones aching from the unforgiving hardness of the packed earth beneath her. Sometimes rats would scatter at her movement, their sleek bodies slipping through the shadows like secrets. The air was always cold at that hour, sharp and biting, and the soles of her feet stung as they met the ground. She wrapped her threadbare shawl tightly around her shoulders, though it did little to chase away the chill. The fire for Mrs. Grace's tea had to be ready before the woman awoke, lest another beating follow, swift, cruel, and without explanation. In those quiet, stolen moments before the household stirred, Gloria sometimes heard the ghost of her mother's voice, soft as the rustle of dry cassava leaves, whispering through the wind that sighed against the crooked shutters. "My little lioness," Mama had said long ago, her voice warm and musical, her fingers deftly weaving Gloria's thick hair into tight, careful braids that prickled against her scalp. "The world will try to break you, but remember, even the mightiest baobab was once just a seed fighting through the earth." Gloria clung to those words like a lifeline, repeating them silently when her knees gave out from fatigue or when her vision blurred from hunger. She wrapped them around her heart like armor, the memory of her mother's touch almost drowning out the sting of Mrs. Grace's latest blows. The stepmother's cruelty was as constant as the sun, a relentless force that left no room for kindness. There was no malice in her eyes, just cold calculation, the empty gaze of someone who struck not out of rage, but out of routine. Just yesterday, she had accidentally tipped a pot of boiling water onto Gloria's arm while she stirred the evening porridge, the searing pain radiating up her skin like wildfire. The blistering welt throbbed with every breath, but Gloria said nothing. She had learned that silence was safer than complaint. "Clumsy fool!" the woman had shrieked, her voice sharp as a whip, even as Gloria bit her lip bloody to keep from crying out. Her father, once a proud farmer who had carried her on his shoulders through the endless cassava fields, now sat slumped at the table like a discarded marionette, his trembling hands unable to even lift a spoon, his gaze fixed on the murky depths of his palm wine as if it held answers he would never find. His hair, once thick and black, had gone gray in uneven patches, and his skin hung loose from his face like clothes that no longer fit. He rarely spoke, and when he did, it was to mutter nonsense to ghosts or curse the flies that buzzed around his plate. Gloria did not know when he had stopped seeing her, but she remembered the last time he had looked at her like his daughter, with pride and love and something bright in his eyes. That light had long since gone out, snuffed by grief and shame and the drink that dulled everything it touched. Her world was small, bounded by the well, the marketplace, the dusty road that led to the fields, and the cramped walls of the house she no longer called home. Days blurred into each other, a tapestry of toil and silence, of hot sun and harder labor. The women at the market spoke in hushed tones around her, their eyes averted, not out of cruelty but out of helplessness. They had seen too many girls like her, and they knew better than to offer sympathy that couldn't change anything. Pity was a luxury none of them could afford. She lived for the moments in between, when the sun dipped low and painted the sky in colors too beautiful for such a place, when Sam, her 8-year-old half-brother, sneaked her crusts of bread or whispered silly jokes into her ear, his grin gap-toothed and full of mischief. Sam was the only warmth left in her life, a flickering candle in a house long gone cold. He reminded her of herself before everything had crumbled, before Mama's fever and the funeral that had stolen the color from her world. Sometimes in the quiet of night, she would lie awake and listen to the sounds of the village breathing, dogs barking in the distance, babies fussing, the occasional snore or drunken shout, and she would wonder if this was it, if this was all there would ever be. Dust and pain and silence. Then came Harrison. The city man arrived on a morning choked with dust, the air thick and heavy, as if the very earth resisted his presence. Even the birds were silent that day, their usual morning songs stifled by the oppressive heat. The sun had barely cleared the horizon, yet already the air shimmered with rising waves and the red sand shifted restlessly underfoot. The villagers watched from shaded thresholds as he walked into Amera, his steps steady, his posture unbending. His boots were worn thin from travel, the leather cracked and peeling like the bark of a thirsty tree. But there was something unmistakable in the way he carried himself, a quiet strength, a steadiness that did not bend to the wind. He introduced himself simply as Harrison, no last name, no embellishments. Just Harrison. He didn't smile often, and when he did, it was brief, fleeting, like a secret the world wasn't meant to see. Unlike the other seasonal workers who leered and whistled when Gloria passed with her heavy load of firewood or bent to gather water, Harrison said nothing, only watched with dark, unreadable eyes that seemed to hold stories buried beneath years of silence. He never called her girl or you there, the way others did. Instead, he simply nodded when their paths crossed, as if to say, I see you. On his third day, Gloria caught him staring as Mrs. Grace berated her for some imagined offense. The stew too thick, the laundry not white enough, the floor still dusty. Harrison stood a few paces away, his jaw clenched so tight she could see the muscle twitch beneath his skin, his fingers curling into fists at his sides. There was something in his gaze that Gloria hadn't seen in years. Not pity, not curiosity, but anger. A righteous, smoldering fury that burned like embers in the night. It unsettled her, not because it frightened her, but because it reminded her what it felt like to be defended, even silently. That evening, beneath her thin, moth-eaten blanket that smelled of smoke and old sweat, she found 2 ripe mangoes, their golden skins smooth and unblemished, nestled in the folds of cloth like treasures. A note lay beside them, written in careful, deliberate script that bore the marks of someone unused to softness. The sweetest fruits grow tallest, keep reaching. Her breath caught. It was such a small gesture, but in a world where kindness had become a myth, it felt enormous. She pressed the note to her chest, her fingers trembling. Who was this man, and why had he chosen to show her kindness in a place that had long forgotten the meaning of the word? Over the weeks that followed, she watched him the way a starving person watches food, cautiously, reverently, with a hunger she didn't fully understand. He worked from the first pale light of dawn until the stars emerged, their cold brilliance a silent audience to his labor. He never complained, never rested more than a moment, never joined the other men in their laughter or their lewd jokes. There was a rhythm to his movements, a grace born of discipline. Gloria noticed the small things, the way he always sharpened his tools at the end of the day, the rhythmic scrape of metal against stone, a quiet melody in the dusk. The way he paused to wipe his brow with a faded red handkerchief, the fabric stained with sweat and dust. The way his eyes followed her father's drunken stumbling was something that looked like sorrow, as if he saw a man who had once been something greater, something whole. They did not speak often, but when they did, it was never about the weather or the crops. Their words were sparse, chosen with care. One evening as she fetched water, he approached, his shadow stretching long across the dry earth. "Your brother," he said, nodding toward Sam, who was chasing a goat with a crooked stick, giggling madly. "He has your spirit." Gloria blinked, startled. "My spirit?" Harrison shrugged. "Fierce, bright, untamed." No one had called her that in years. She didn't even know she still believed it. But hearing it aloud from someone who looked at her as though she mattered made something inside her stir. A memory, maybe, of the girl she used to be before life had worn her down to the bone. The confrontation came on a day so blisteringly hot that even the chickens panted in the shade. Their beaks parted as they sought refuge from the merciless sun. The air shimmered with heat waves, turning everything into a mirage. Gloria's dress clung to her back, soaked in sweat, and her blistered arm throbbed beneath the makeshift bandage Sam had helped her tie. Harrison stood before Mr. Thomas, his palm outstretched, his voice steady and low. "My wages, sir. 3 months' work." The silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. A fly buzzed lazily around Mr. Thomas's head, but he didn't move to swat it. His bloodshot eyes struggled to focus on Harrison, his breath sour with stale palm wine. Then came that terrible wheezing laugh, the sound like dry leaves crushed underfoot. "Money?" Mr. Thomas spat into the dirt, a glob of phlegm landing between Harrison's boots. He waved a shaking hand toward Gloria, who stood frozen by the well, the heavy bucket of water slipping from her numb fingers. "Take her instead. Worthless girl, one less mouth to feed." The world seemed to stop. The chickens fell silent. Even Mrs. Grace paused in her endless stream of scolding, her lips twisting into a cruel smile that didn't reach her eyes. Behind the hut, Sam pressed his face to the cracked wall, his small body trembling, his breath coming in shallow, frightened gasps. Gloria could feel her heart thudding in her chest, each beat loud and ragged. Her hands slipped on the wet rope, the bucket crashing to the ground with a sound that echoed like a gunshot in the sudden silence. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. This wasn't happening. "Take her tonight," Mr. Thomas slurred, already turning away, his steps unsteady, his attention already slipping back to the bottle. "Before I change my mind." She expected Harrison to leave, to disappear as quietly as he had arrived. That would have been easier, in a way. But instead that night, as the village slept beneath a blanket of stars, as frogs sang from distant puddles, and the wind stirred the tall grasses with secrets, Sam crept to Gloria's corner, his bare feet silent on the hard-packed earth. He knelt beside her, his face streaked with tears and dirt, and pressed something cold into her palm. Mama's necklace, the tiny golden lion pendant she had thought lost forever. "You have to go," he whispered, his voice trembling. "Like the lioness in Mama's stories, run and don't look back." The pendant seemed to glow in the moonlight, its tiny eyes fierce and unyielding. Gloria swallowed hard, her throat tight with unshed tears. She pulled Sam into her arms, holding him so tightly he whimpered, but he didn't pull away. "I'll come back for you," she whispered into his hair. "One day, I promise." Before the rooster could crow, she was gone. The journey to the city was a blur of noise and color and smells so foreign they made Gloria's head spin. The bus rattled and groaned over pitted roads, lurching like a wounded beast. The landscape shifted slowly from the familiar dusty red of Amera to lush, unfamiliar greens, past towns where electric lights glowed like trapped stars, their brilliance almost painful after a lifetime of dim kerosene lamps. Gloria pressed her face to the window, wide-eyed, overwhelmed. It was as if she had stepped into another world, one where time moved faster and nothing stayed still long enough to catch your breath. Harrison sat beside her, his presence solid and reassuring. When the motion and the overwhelming stench of exhaust and crowded bodies made her stomach revolt, he wordlessly offered his red handkerchief, the same one she'd seen so often, now a tether in the chaos. His large hand rested lightly against her back, warm and steady. "Breathe through your mouth," he murmured. "The air tastes better that way." Gloria closed her eyes and did as he said. The nausea eased, but the ache in her chest remained, a strange, twisting pain made of fear and hope, and something else she dared not name. Mrs. Walker's mansion appeared like a mirage at the edge of the city's sprawl. Tall white walls glowing in the sunset like bleached bone. Iron gates that swung open, not with creaks, but with a smooth whisper, revealing manicured lawns. Flowering trees that drooped with violet blossoms, and tinkling fountains that danced with perfect symmetry. The air, heavy with the scent of jasmine and hibiscus, felt sweet enough to choke on after the scorched dryness of Amera. Gloria clutched her worn plastic bag to her chest like a shield, her eyes darting across the manicured beauty that surrounded her. This was not the world she knew. This was a place of symmetry and silence, of polished marble floors and whispered footsteps, where every breath felt borrowed and every kindness suspect. Her feet sank slightly into the soft gravel as they approached the front door, and for a moment Gloria hesitated. The house was so large it didn't seem real. White shutters blinked like watchful eyes from every window. Water lapped gently in a marble basin at the entrance, where koi fish drifted lazily beneath floating petals. She glanced up at Harrison, but he said nothing, only gave her a quiet nod, his expression unreadable. Beautiful cages, she reminded herself, were still cages. The tests began immediately, though they were never spoken of. A week's wages forgotten on her dresser, left carelessly in an unsealed envelope, as if daring her. A diamond earring accidentally dropped into the folds of a bedsheet. Once she returned from the garden to find an envelope stuffed with crisp bills placed neatly on her pillow. No note, no explanation, just a silent temptation left like bait. Each time Gloria returned what wasn't hers, her hands steady even as her pulse raced. She understood the game. She had seen traps before, though they'd never been gilded. Mrs. Walker watched it all through half-lidded eyes, her mouth always curled in the faint suggestion of a smile that never reached her eyes. She was a tall woman, elegant in that effortless way only great wealth allowed. Her clothes soft, her scent subtle, her voice calm and smooth like cooled syrup. She never raised her voice, never issued commands twice. She didn't need to. Her presence alone drew obedience. When Gloria first met her, she had expected cruelty. What she found was worse. Precision. Cold, clinical, elegant control. "Tell me, Gloria," Mrs. Walker said one afternoon, while sipping tea on the terrace, her eyes scanning the garden as if searching for weeds. "What does loyalty mean to you?" Gloria, kneeling to gather fallen blossoms, did not look up. "It means not breaking, even when it would be easier." There was a pause, then, "Good answer." Daniel's tests were different. His were not crafted from temptation, but from invasion. He was the kind of man who smiled too widely, who wore wealth like a second skin, who believed charm was the same as character. He'd corner her in the kitchen under the excuse of asking about spices, his expensive cologne cloying and thick, making her eyes water. "Such soft hands for a farm girl," he'd purr, letting his fingers brush her waist with the casual entitlement of a man who'd never been told no. Gloria learned quickly to keep a wooden spoon within reach at all times, her grip firm, her stance steady. One evening, as he loomed closer, his hand brushing her hip, Gloria didn't flinch. Instead, she turned slowly, meeting his gaze without fear. "Touch me again," she said, her voice low and dangerous, "and I'll show you how farm girls deal with snakes." Daniel had chuckled, but something in her eyes made him step back. He didn't try again, at least not overtly, but he watched her, always. In the quiet of the servant quarters, Gloria tried to make sense of her new world. The other workers kept their distance at first, unsure of the girl with the straight back and quiet eyes, but slowly they began to nod to her in passing. A gardener handed her a flower one morning without a word. The cook left an extra portion of stew at her place. Little gestures, silent welcomes. She accepted them with the same guarded heart she had brought from Amera, but inside something unfurled, a fragile seed of belonging, unfamiliar and unsteady. Still, she waited. For the catch, the twist, the moment the ground would fall out from beneath her again. It came on a night thick with the scent of rain, the air heavy with the promise of a storm. The clouds hung low and dark, and thunder rolled in the distance like distant drums. Harrison had asked her to meet him at the cottage, one of the smaller buildings at the edge of the property, tucked behind a wall of ivy and oleander. She approached cautiously, her bare feet silent on the stone path. The air felt charged, electric, as if the night itself were holding its breath. Inside, the room was dimly lit by a single oil lamp. Harrison stood beside a table, his hands resting on something worn and leather-bound. He turned as she entered, and Gloria stopped in her tracks. There was something different in his eyes, something raw and unguarded. Without a word, he opened the suitcase. It wasn't filled with clothes. Newspaper clippings spilled out, carefully cut articles, some yellowed with age, others fresh. Headlines blared in bold print. Walker family buys another mine. Philanthropist Margaret Walker donates hospital wing. Socialite son seen at gala with ambassador's daughter. And there, in a society column photo, stood Harrison in a tailored suit, his arm linked with Mrs. Walker's, his smile polished and practiced. Gloria stared, her breath catching in her throat. "It was all a test," he said finally, his voice hoarse. "After my father died, everything changed. I inherited the name, the money, the expectations, and the people. So many women only wanted the fortune. They didn't see me. They didn't want me." He reached up, his hands trembling slightly as they cupped her face with unbearable gentleness. "I needed to know someone could love the man, not the fortune. So I came here, stripped everything away, lived as the worker, not the heir. And you saw me." Gloria's laughter rang out before she could stop it, bright and startled, like the shattering of glass in a quiet room. "You idiot," she said and kissed him, hard and sudden, pouring years of pent-up pain, hope, and unspoken love into that single touch. When she pulled back, her eyes shimmered. "You could have been a beggar, and I'd have followed you." Harrison's smile then was real, soft, a little broken. He pressed his forehead to hers and exhaled as though he had been holding his breath for years. Outside, the rain began to fall. Years later, the sky above Amera burned with the same relentless orange haze, and the red sand still clung to everything like a curse that time could not erase. The wind carried its memory across the land, coating rooftops, curling into corners of rooms, and weaving itself into the breath of those who remained. But to Gloria, the dust no longer felt suffocating. It felt like history, like an echo, like a ghost she had finally learned to live with. She stood once again at her childhood well, the dry, cracked stones warm beneath her fingers, the air around her humming with the heat of the approaching noon. Children's laughter echoed in the distance, their bare feet kicking up little storms as they ran, unaware of how the dust would cling to them for the rest of their lives. She watched them with a quiet, reverent stillness, her shadow long against the ground. Around her neck, warm from the sun and resting against the silk of her blouse, hung the golden lion pendant. Mama's lioness, gleaming against her skin, its tiny form no less fierce for its size. The well hadn't changed, still dry, still useless, but it no longer felt like a grave. It felt like a monument, like something that had survived. She turned as her father shuffled toward her, his frame frail and stooped, his feet dragging across the dirt with the tentative slowness of someone unsure if he was welcome. Time had not been kind to him. His hands, once so strong they could till even the toughest earth, now shook with every movement. His eyes, bloodshot and watery, tried and failed to hold her gaze. He was thinner than she remembered, almost insubstantial, as if even his shame had started to hollow him out. He reached out a trembling hand, palm open, not in greeting, but in need. Coins, food, something, anything. Gloria looked at that hand for a long moment. Once it had lifted her onto his shoulders. Once it had wiped her tears. And once it had abandoned her in the cruelest way a father could, by choosing silence when it mattered most. She pressed a thick roll of bills into his palm. Not coins, not pity. He flinched slightly at her touch but didn't resist. She closed his fingers around the money gently, then held his hand for a moment longer than necessary. "I forgive you," she said softly. Her voice did not tremble. But I'll never be yours again? His mouth opened as if to speak, but no words came. Only the wind replied, stirring the dust between them. She stepped back, turned, and walked toward the car parked beneath the wide limbs of the ancient baobab tree that had once been her only shade. Its gnarled roots still twisted through the dry ground like veins, and its branches reached stubbornly toward the sky, as if it, too, remembered her mother's words. Harrison waited by the car, leaning against the door, his suit crisp, his shoes already dusted red despite his best efforts. He watched her with the quiet reverence of a man who knew exactly how much this moment cost. As she approached, he opened the door for her without a word, but when she stepped past him, he caught her hand in his. "My queen," he whispered, brushing his lips against her knuckles like a vow renewed. She smiled. It was a smile made not of joy or triumph, but of peace, of survival, of reclamation. In the back seat, their daughter hummed a lullaby under her breath, a tune Gloria hadn't heard in years, one Mama used to sing while rocking her to sleep under the stars. The little girl, all coiled braids and bright eyes, had no idea how far her mother had come, how deep the roots of the song ran. But she sang it anyway, her voice sweet and clear, like sunlight filtering through leaves. Gloria turned to look out the window as the car began to roll forward, the village slipping away behind them. The road was bumpy, the red earth rising in plumes around the tires, and in the mirror she saw her father still standing by the well, his figure slowly shrinking until it was swallowed by distance. She didn't cry. There was no need. Amara would always live inside her, in the scars on her arms, in the memory of Sam's laugh, in the smell of roasted cassava, in the creak of the kitchen door at dawn, in the heat that blistered and baptized. It had raised her and buried her, and broken her and shaped her. But it no longer defined her. She was no longer the girl who flinched at sudden footsteps, who slept with her fist clenched. She was no longer the shadow hiding in a kitchen corner. She was Dr. Gloria Walker now, physician, speaker, survivor. She was the woman who had walked through fire and carried her family's ghost with grace, the woman who had loved without certainty and had been loved not despite her past, but because of it. The woman who had been told to run and not look back. But now, as the dust swirled in the car's wake and the baobab disappeared behind the bend, she did look back. Once, and smiled. Because somewhere in the red dust of Amara, where the sand still clung like memory, and the wind still whispered old lullabies, a lioness had roared, and the world had finally heard her.